Kia ora whānau, I'm here at the Kaitaia Primary School. Ka tahi anō mātou kia mutu, te huaki I te whare kaukau, whare hākinakina, me te tuku karakia mo te pokapū I Kaitaia. We've had prayers this morning acknowledging the opening of our sports centre at Moirua Park and acknowledging the project to create at the centre of Kaitaia a meeting place. We are now going to turn our attention to some of the history pertaining to the location of the kura here. So the word te ahu reflects that it was a good gardening area, not necessarily just here, but in order to derive your livelihood, you had to be very industrious in this area. It wasn't blessed with those rich and highly sought after areas around the Bay of Islands, in particular Kerikeri, which after all Kerikeri means to dig, and that's how common it was for people to excel over that part of the motu because of the fertility of the soil. Anyway, coming back to Te Ahu. At the time of the arrival of the missionaries, let's just say around about 1830, the massive battles between the Te Rarawa tribe and the Te Aupōuri tribe had already been settled, and they took place along the 90-mile beach. One was located at Waituku Paho, and that's slightly north of the location of the Kaitaia Golf Course. And Waituku Paho is where the Taungonge Swamp partially drains out into the Te Oneroa Tohe, the 90-mile beach, named after the great ancestor Tohe who left Spirits Bay after he had been plagued by heavy dreams that his daughter, Ranini Kura, his only daughter, was in mortal danger. And then he eventually perished down in Ngāti Whātua, and as he lay after he had passed away, the name Ngāti Manu derived because it was reputed that the manu, the birds, began to peck at his eyes. A rather gruesome story, but as I said earlier, you can't cherry pick history. So anyhow, the musket hostilities that were very significant had drawn to an end, and then the missionaries arrived. When the missionaries came, they came via the Oruru Valley, they came via Bangaroa, and they came via Kohumaru, which later became known as Kenana, which is out of the Bible, because when they crossed that river and found that fertile valley, they discovered an unusual thing, that the kumara were flowering, which is an extraordinarily rare thing to see. And from there we got the name Canaan in Kenana, which is the Maori variation of the term Canaan out of the Bible. And that led to the eventual dissipation really of the name Kohumaru. There's a host of other names around that area, not the least of which is Waikotokoto, the beautiful little stream going down past the marae. Anyhow, they come to the peak of Te Kerekere Pā. I think it's now called Colonel Bell's Hill. And the tupuna who lived there at a certain point in time was Te Okenga. Te Okenga then retreated to live in Herikino. But as Pene Te Wahanga, an ancestor from the Ngātirangi Hapu around Ngāpā, as they came over the brow, it was evident there was a great big war council taking place. The war council related to Titore, a tupuna from the Bay of Islands, petitioning the Muriwhenua people to accompany him on a battle to the south. It was the battle that they were seeking to secure utu for in Tauranga. By this time, the paramount chief of the Rarawa tribe had passed away. He was Poro, he was the undisputed leader. And the missionaries don't really record much of him because they weren't all that active in the Ahipara area in the late 1820s. Their locus of activity was the Bay of Islands and occasionally in and around Whangaroa. And there was an unsuccessful attempt to create, not far from the Picture Theatre, a Wesleyan mission station. And Pōroa had been the ancestor who composed the famous whakapepeha, whakatauki, after the great Hongi Hika died in 1820. And it goes, Hongi, hanga tō pā, Hongi ure nui, Hongi ure roa, Hongi ure whakatangi hanga e, kota pipi tauri ki raro e. And he composed and uttered that saying at Aurere. And it was after the undisputed warrior musket chief of the Tai Tokero Hongi met his Waterloo, when he went to live back with his mother's people in Whangaroa. And people had asked Hongi, even the northerners up here thought he would be a great king. And because he had met King George and he had been to England and brought back through nefarious means muskets. But that was after the Battle of Waterloo. So there was a civ fate, there was an abundance of weapons floating around over there. This was obviously after the, the great confrontation had ended between England and France. So he never ever felt that he could deliver the necessary qualities to be a king. And he said, I had ko pau katoa I ahau ngā tai o te motu, ngā hau nunui, ngā hau ririki, hoki rawa mai ki te tuohutanga, ko te nanati, ke te kapu o te ringa, nātia, which means I've swept all before me, and I come back to my kith and kin, and the cup of my own hand squeezes life out of me. And he had a prediction that he'd meet his own Waterloo, which he did in Mangamuka. And it was after he died that Pōroa then died, and then this area was no longer under the exclusive leadership of Pōroa. It was then that when the missionaries arrived, that Panakareo, a nephew of Pōroa, had risen in prominence. He had sought to create his own little trading post at Monganui, but Monganui could never ever rival the Bay of Islands, the whalers and the sort of other traders. They knew where their bread was buttered, figuratively speaking. So the missionaries arrived, that's Paki and Matthews, over the brow of the hill. I'm not sure if they were both there that day. Titore is petitioning the Mori Whenua to come and accompany the Ngāpuhi going south. Panakareo summons his people. He got Te Ahuahu, I think was the name of the tupuna from Te Pātū, to go and bring them down. The Ngāpuhi told him, you should get rid of these people. They've had both good and bad influence on us in Ngāpuhi land. And Panakareo, with an eye slightly entrepreneurial, probably a case of where his ambitions were inversely related to his actual capacity. He, the funny story is that, okay, you tell me, missionaries, that we shouldn't do anything to you, to harm you on this day because you've arrived on a holy day, ara tapu. Missionaries, whether it was a Sunday or not, I don't know. They said, oh no, he tapu tēnei rā, because they knew that Māori whānau lived in dread of tapu. And in many respects, tapu is still quite a major feature of Māori life today. Perhaps if people respected it more, we'd have fewer of our dramas anyhow. Then that encounter turned into a humorous story. In Māori it goes like this. He kite no ngā kaumātua, he rongo no ngā kaumātua I ngā mihingare e meana kei patua mātou, tātu mea ko tēnei rangi ka taumai e mātou he rā tapu. Ka whakautua mai e ngā tūpuna e mara hiroki rawa tūai rawa. Kāhore he momona he ngaungau mā mātou, tāri e te wā kia āhua nui ai te tinana, which means, oh well, we won't deal to them today. They look very skinny, unfit for any meal, let's fatten them up. Of course, it's highly unlikely to be true, but it did lead to a type of black sense of humour. Bleak sense of humour on the marae when I grew up, so it's still a story we tell. So Panakareao, whose proper name was Ngākuku Panakareao. Nōpera was the name that came from the missionaries. Ngākuku were the pigeons caught in the Kareao bush. And that name goes back to his father, Te Kākā, and Te Kākā married Whakaeke. And Whakaeke was the daughter of Mōria, so this is the genealogy. Tohe is the ancestor who trekked down the 90-mile beach, who had a daughter called Rānini Kura, who had been betrothed to Rā Tūroa of the Ngāti Whātua tribe, and married at a place called Waipuna on the shores of the Pārengarenga Harbour. They then had a child called Tikatarangi. Tikatarangi had a child called Te Huaki ki te Rangi. Te Huaki ki te Rangi had the queen of the Taitokero, Waimirirangi, a name that's not only a melodious, beautiful woman's name, but it adorns a cup that was set up after, I think around about the time of the First World War, to stimulate sporting contests between the different hapu. Then Waimirirangi had a son called Tamatea, and Tamatea's descendants predominantly live in and around Motuti, Panguru. Then Tamatea has a son called Takateauahi, and Takateauahi has the progenitor, the originator of the Rarawa tribe called Tarutaru. Then Tarutaru has 7 or 8, 9 children, and one was called Ramotu, and she married Te Pā, and their child was the Ariki Whakamutunga, the last paramount chief of the Rarawa people, Koro, who, although he was a master strategist and had an uncanny ability to read people's motivations, but also predict in battle how the battle would break. And he enjoyed a host of highly successful forays, and it was actually him who prevented the slaughter, because Hongi Hika, once he got into the bloodlust, he was unstoppable. He was like some kind of major Viking bloodthirsty character you'd see in European literature. But Hongi Hika, he did, I don't know if you'd call it a failing, but he was very much, once the battle commenced, there was no point in finishing the battle unless you'd finished your foe. Poro was not like that. Once the battle had broken, he was a peacemaker. And he made the peace, and the peace was called Te Huru Manu. And the peace was the marriage of some of the Tainui women to the Te Rarawa people. And one of those marriages lie at the base of the Pukero Tānu. Anyhow, so then the missionaries arrive, and then they eventually create their mission here. It's from the mission station here that Paki decided to leave and go and visit the spirit tree, and that's called Te Ako Te Reinga. That's the Pūtakawa tree where the roots cling to the rock at Te Reinga. And there was an old kuia who was blind, and she was living at the station with Paki, and Paki's wife spoke Māori. And this old kuia had worked out that Paki was heading to the spirit tree at Te Rerenga Wairua, and she feared that he was taking an axe to cut the tree to expedite the conversion to Christianity of the local hapu. And she spoke to Paki's wife, or Paki's wife overheard her talking in Māori, and then she spoke to the Tāne, her husband. And he objected to this old duck having heathenistic views, and said he was set on his ways and he would go. So this kuia was obviously a tohunga, and she was blind but she could see, so the Māoris call that a matakite. And she had a relative living at Hauhora. Some manner of form, she sent a message, and that ancestor's name was Whiti. And Whiti and Waitohi were of a generation who also lived at the pā and the ridge of hills above the current Kaitaia rugby ground. Anyhow, off goes Paki from Te Ahu, very close to the location of the Kaitaia Primary School. And he is accompanied by Pairata. And Pairata is the ancestor of Reverend Māori Marsden, but that name, Pairata, meant the pilot. And he was very experienced with dealing with European people because he had piloted the ships up the Awanui harbour and other northern estuaries, because if you get the tide wrong, your prospects are fairly dim. So away they go, and they get to Hauhora, and Whiti steps out of his hiding place and challenges Paki, one of the original missionaries, and says to Pairata, a younger man, why are you doing this? He hatau. What are you going to achieve by taking the Pākehā missionary to the spirit tree? And he said, no harm will come. He just wants to make his way up and see for himself this much vaunted place where the Māoris believe that they leave the material world into the spirit world. And Whiti said to Pairata, when you were a young man in battle, I stopped the axe from falling on your head. If any harm comes to that tree or our beliefs, no one will stop the striking that will come your way. So they go, and then they meet at the area north of Scott's Point, a small group of tupuna who include Kihirini, I think, Te Morenga, his people. And they are Arawa people, but they're backwards and forwards and living all around the 90-mile beach and chasing food and whatnot. And then he gets eventually to Te Rerenga Wairua, and of course he realises the enormity of what perhaps he had thought to achieve, which was to sever that tree from the side of the cliff. And writes about it, looks at it, no cell phones, no photographs, no drawings, and then comes back, and they come back to this area right here. So the ancestor from Ahipara Te Huhu, who had signed the treaty and the Declaration of Independence, and he and his brother Papahia were very, very senior, and they were at least the senior of Nopera Panakario. And their great hui and feasting is happening because they want to know what the hell has this missionary done on his trip up to the spirit tree. And a great debate ensues, and Te Huhu had some servants with them, and they had been heating hangi stones that were white hot. And as they heated those stones, they kept taunting Paki, if you have severed the tree and interfered with our old beliefs, that's your future. So then they get the kuia, the old blind lady, and she already knows what's happening because she had a spirit bird. And the Māoris believed that a mana or a spirit would materialise in the form of a feature in the natural environment, whether it was a stingray, some hapus, that is the kaitiaki, a stingray, or Ngāti Kahu, they had the shark, or the people at Kenana, they had an octopus, and that octopus lived at Motu Taraiti, which is a tiny little island off Koikoia, which is the name for Cooper's Beach. Koikoia was the shiny kuku. Anyhow, she has the mopok. And the round shoes and how it ends, which kind of secured the place of the missionaries here on the site. Whiti and his generation said, Hei a koe, te reanga hau, hei a mātou a tūnohunohu mā te aka ki te reina, hei a koe, ko te reanga e kake ki te rangi. And that meant, we give you the children, but we won't give of ourselves, because we cling tenaciously to the roots of the pohutakawa tree, which is our roadway to life beyond what we experience today. So then Panakareao continues to cultivate relationships with these missionaries, mistakenly thinking that they are a roadway to pay a whole host of new openings where he could rival what was happening in the Bay of Islands. But they lacked the anchorage, they lacked the massive Waimate north fertile soil, and then begun the sad and confused history of land transactions. And it's at that point that Panakareao's reputation takes a deep dive, because it had been Panakareao at Te Ikahunuhunu, the battle site where the current Kaitaia community hall is located. It's at that site that Panakareao says the shadow of the land when he signed the treaty to the Queen, but the Maori and the mana were us forever. And then he reversed that saying, shall I say, that pepeha, several years later, realising that in entering into the treaty, he felt that he had been left with nothing but a shadow. Then people started to move away from his leadership, and a host began to congregate around Puhipi. And Puhipi's name comes from Busby, who had been the British resident before the arrival of Governor Hobson. And Puhipi's indigenous name was Tiripi, or Terewharewa. And then he spawned his own tribe. And of course, until recently, the most senior identity of that whānau was Uncle Hector Busby. So the area here in Te Ahu, it was I wouldn't call it the lair, but it was an area that soon became contested because the missionaries realised that this is where the density of the population was. The Tangongi swamp, anora te mara, anora te mara ataki wairua. Tangongi noa te taro. There lies the great cultivation of taki wairua, and the taro leaves rustle endlessly in the breeze. That reflected the fact that that enormous swamp was one huge food bowl, and it's another story how the swamp got drained and all the rest of it. But tangongi is a very old Polynesian word, and it reflects the noise that you hear in a vegetable patch when the breeze gets up and the density of the vegetables growing together, the leaves rustle with each other. So in that sense, this was a highly sought after area, and of course the Waikuruki River Creek enabled you to go straight out to the Awanui Harbour. And the Ngaitohianga people at Oturu, they come from an ancestor called Tamahui, and the name Oturu is from a phase of the moon that unveils itself at Te Rearea, which is the hill line to the east of the Oturu Marae. So we know that Kaitaia, is now located. The name is appended to this part of the geography, but it didn't originate here. The story originated further towards Mangamuka, and the story commemorates the two wives, two kotia, Tarapati, of the ancestor Tuakai. And Tuakai, the waka was tinana, and the tupuna is Tumoana. Tumoana had Tamahotu, Tamahotu had Tamamoko, Tamamoko had Haupure, Haupure had Pātito, and Pātito had Tuakai. And Tuakai married two ladies, Tarapati and two kotia. And they had two, obviously were in charge of storing food. And one storage house was called Maruaroto and the other was called Maruawaho. And that reflects the fact that one of the wives was reputed for her industriousness and wasn't blessed with the finest of looks, and the other was very vain and incredibly beautiful woman who mistakenly thought in that type of economy good looks enough would get you through the winter. That didn't prove to be the case. So Kaitaia reflects the fact that the Tukotia's storehouse was so overwhelmed with food, it continually thudded on the ground. And that means tata. So that became Kaitaia, from the thudding of the food dropping out of the storehouse onto the ground. Kai is food, and that means tata, and the passive form is taia. So that's where you get the name Kaitaia. And that name appealed to the missionaries. Whether or not they changed the story, who knows, may have, but they began to use that name for this area because they felt it reflected a worthy moral. The original name of this particular site, though, was Te Aku, and I've told you it means to be industrious, but it also reflects like planting. Yeah. In terms of the other place names around Kaitaia, you should never overlook the fact there's a pa not far from above the Kaitaia College, and the name that I was taught when I was at St. Stephen's School in the 70s was Tino Tino, and it's where the ancestor Kahungunu, who then left the far north and became the progenitor of the Hawke's Bay tribe, and his father was Tamatea, because the Takitimu Waka, one of my elders who taught me a lot of genealogy, he told me that when the original tupuna came here from the Pacific, the far north became known as a type of Hawaii, because this was the first place where many of them arrived to. And then from here they dispersed to other parts of the country, and that was the case with Takitimu Waka, Tamatea, and Kahungunu. And Moirua reflects the fact that Tuakai, the tupuna I just spoke to you about, he had two wives. And moi means not only to go to sleep, hoping I'm not putting you to sleep, and it means to get married. So that's a wee example of where Panakareo got his name from, how he grew to prominence. He replaced Poro, but not for a long period of time, because it became evident that his decision making was not generating the benefits that he had rooted on. And he suffered quite a lot of loss of mana when he fought the Ngāpuhi in Taipa. So in about 1842, 1843, this was the first, certainly the first northern battle after the treaty was signed. So Panakareo, in order to secure more European settlement, started allocating land which offended the people from what we now know as Kenana in that Otangaro area. So then they summoned the Ngāpuhi, and the Ngāpuhi came, and Te Rarawa, under the leadership of Panakareo, had a battle at Taipa, and eventually the peace was made after blood had been spilt and death took place. In fact, some of the bones from that battle were uncovered by the tide. And one time when I was back from St. Stephen's School, 1974, I hoki mai area hoki te kāinga. I think I had my appendix out, something like that. And then when I was resting at home, my I think it was my grandmother or maybe my auntie anyhow, a group of us went with a young Anglican minister, Dena Circuit, who was a missionary, or he was a missionary actually, and when I was young, it was not a very nice thing to say, I suppose, but anyhow, he was a very active young Anglican priest. Got us together, and we had to go to Taipa, because the local Adamsons had uncovered these bones, washing away. And Kaui Tomas, who was very active in that area, and then when we gathered up these bones, we took them to the local urupa, which is the Matakairiri urupa, the hapu there at Taipa. But as we left, and my old auntie was, they used cooked food. Although they were Christian, they had these old Maori ways as well, taking cooked food with them and leaving it there. And I saw these lizards, and being slightly superstitious myself. And then I said to my aunt, Nana Taha, so, he moko moko. And then she said to me in Māori, e pai ana, e hoki ana, e pai ana, wai hoki haere, e hoki ana rātou ki te tia ki te toina. And that means leave them be, they're going to look after the rest of the bones. So that would be in about 1974, 75. And she said, no, he said to me, Koe Tomas, that was the site of the battle, and those would be the old bones that had probably just been left there because blood was spilled. So after that period of time, Panakareo, his mana was diminished. The Ngāpuhi, the name of the Ngāpuhi was the name of the tupuna was Pororua. Pororua's father was Te Taiepa, but Pororua became the leader of that faction of Ngāti Kahu that believed they were part of Ngāpuhi, then another faction of Ngāti Kahu believed they're part of Te Rarawa. And they were led by Tipene Te Taha, and Tipene Te Taha stood up and said, do not overlook my tribe, its name is Ngāti Kahu. And I think in the colonial records, it's the first time that was Ngāti Kahu mentioned. Then Panakareo's daughter got given, she inherited Panakareo's land at Oruru at a place called Pākau Tararua, which is the double-barbed stingray. And the precise location of that is at the old Oruru dairy factory. And that remained her land, and many Māori whānau lived there until they eventually moved off because it became really important to open that valley up for dairy farming and immigration from England and whatever happened. And then the problem why it's always been a bone of contention is that Panakareo's daughter was deaf. So how on earth she could have ever given instructions as to what was to happen to her land. Her name was Wharo. And the person who took over as her kaitiaki, or her guardian, I suppose, may not have been a guardian, just someone trying to help her with her affairs, was Yehu Ngāwaka. And Yehu is a biblical name, and the descendants live, that's Jackie Brown's ancestors, they live in Whangape. Then Yehu Ngāwaka's son was Reverend Anaru Ngāwaka. He was the first chairman of the Taitokerau Trust Board. And then his son was Puku Ngāwaka, and that's Jackie Brown's whānau. So I think you should get from what I'm saying as well that there were no hard and fast locations in that type of economy. On the basis of whakapapa and relationships, people moved around, and there was a great deal of reciprocity. I'll help you on this occasion, you help me. So rather than there being formal, harsh lines, as is the case nowadays, that was not the case in the old days. Things were very, well, they're capable of being a lot more fluid-like. So I'll probably kanu you nei koro mo tēnei wā. You got any questions? Is this useful for the tamariki or for you guys?
It ties together a number of things that Harmy has shared with me too. Like when we had our new classrooms brought in to be on site, we had to go through the Historic Society because our whole school had been ring-fenced as an historic site. And nobody could guarantee that we wouldn't find anything with new diggings.
Right.
At that stage, the Crown settlement had taken place, so my takoto and Te Raroa are on the settlement. I had a conversation with Harmy. Harmy said, best keep Ngāti Kahu involved as well, especially the local marae at Oturu. And so had blessings from all three iwi before any of our new classrooms came in. But Harmy said, look, Ngāti Kahu are not yet on the settlement document for this land, but they should be. So
Te Ahu stretches right back. If you follow the road down the back, Te Ahu was just like a ridge line, stretches right back. And then the other battle, it was a bit later, that a bunch of Canadians came and tried to buy from Mangamuka to Awanui or some stupendous thing like that in here. And they were dealing with an ancestor called Tamaho, and I think Tamaho was the son of Te Huhu, who signed the treaty. Anyhow, Tamaho is not a Māori name. It's because they're all Catholic, and they took the name Tomash from a Catholic missionary and turned it into Tamaho. Anyhow, they have a battle out at not far from where Sir Graham Latimer's place is at Pamapuria. And that is between Ngāti Kuri, and that's not the Ngāti Kuri up north. Ngāti Kuri at that stage were living at Herekino and Ahipara. Sorry, Herekino and Whangape, that area. And then, and this ancestor, Tipene Te Taha, who had obviously been really driven to create a political entity called Ngāti Kahu. And anyhow, things are getting crazy and firing muskets and building paths, and it's got out of control. By this time, Commissioner White, I think his name was, is the colonial agent in Mongolia. So they sent for Rutene Te Wā, whose father had been Te Wā, and he had been sent away by the missionaries to learn to be an Anglican priest. So it's, might have been maybe it's 1850s, 1860s. And then what happened, he came back as a peacemaker, but became possessed of the bloodlust of the battle. But anyway, he helped eventually to cement the peace. And there's a famous haka commemorating that battle, which is still around actually. I'll have to I can't think of the words off the top of my head. No, I can't. It eludes me at the moment. And that sealed the fate for quite a lot of the land around there, and it's traceable back to a group of Canadians. What possessed Canadians to come to Kaitaia? And you could say the same thing about the Dalmatians 30 or 40 years later. And that led to a lot of instability between the Tahawai hapu of Te Rarama and the Pātū people of Ngāti Kahu. But this ridgeline goes straight back and eventually drops into a valley on the way at the back of Oturu.
Cool. About that witch. There's a house site halfway down the hill at the back.
So that's an old. That's where part of the.
Mission?
Sorry.
The mission station.
Yeah, I was going to say that's where part of the mission state. So there was a big compound here. I don't know. There would be a map. I don't know. But I came up here a lot when I was at St. Stephen's Dell with Nana Taha. She was very good on church history. Nana Taha was very good on church history. And I remember my grandmother and us coming to bring some flowers to her uncle who's buried right next to Panakareo. I think his name is Hoira for the Joel. And her and one of the old Matthewses took us for a bit of a hikoi around here, and they kind of showed us where the what the extent of the compound was. it was really the next generation where they started fanning out. This was their compound. And this was also where a lot of the leading kids of the Māori whānau would be sent, because they wanted them to learn to read. They wanted them to gain access to the new world, and you couldn't do that unless you had obviously the literacy and numeracy. And one of the tupuna that lived here was Hukatere, and Rewati Hukatere, but Hukatere, he got his name from the Battle of Hukatere, which I'd say is in about 1826. Yeah, it was a famous battle. And its memory was still being recited 100 years later when my grandmother was born in 1892. So that what that generation kind of didn't know, didn't be repeating, because they were of a time where everyone spoke about these things, you know? It was like normalized, socialized. Yes. Oh, right. Kaita. Oh, dude. Oh. Where the heck did you get this from? Oh.
It just exists.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I've never seen this map before, so she was testing me for the last hour.
She's with it.
She's like a ruanuku, she's being a witch to me.
But yeah, because we have been talking about the old witch's hut, and when you
this is that kuya.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't think of her name off the top of my head. It'll come to me, and she's the kuya who warned Paki about his trip to Te Reinga. And a mōpō, absolutely.
But that old motor road's still there.
Yeah.
That other tunnel,
Yeah.
it's still there.
Yeah.
And the orchard.
And the orchard.
Yes, so it's a lot of that. Oh my lord, there you go. That's where the kuya lived. And the name will come to me. I've got it written down somewhere. Yeah. I'll tell you who may have quite a bit of history, mate, is Ross Gregory's daughter.
She's my next bed after you.
Hey? Yeah. I'd get. Oh, hey, Mara, a blind woman lived here.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Oh, you already knew all this story.
Yeah, but I want to know the names.
No, I've got the name. I'm sorry, I can't recall it off the top of my head, because I wrote all this down. I started writing it down when the year I left St. Stephen's in 1978.
Thank you.
And I haven't lost any of those books, but they're in a midden heap. I have to find them, and I know my son's been going through them, copying or trying to. Yeah, it doesn't take me long to remember. Yeah, well, that's where they grew their peri-peri potatoes, eh? Well, I hope I've been of some help to you, Emma.
Amazing. Yeah.
So I'll get the haka for you guys, and maybe it's a haka that someone can come and teach. Maybe I could ask Penny Taui to come and teach your senior boys. And I mean, it's not a pre-European, but it's an old haka about the history just further south from here. And then the haka from I think Mr. Ihaka taught us that haka at St. Stephen's, but it's from the words from but this is before the missionaries got here, when Te Okenga lived here. So I think Waiake was the name of the pā above your farm.
Ake.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Yeah, there's a list of those pās. I got. Yeah, and that's where.
But there's 3 on our place.
Yeah, Theru. I think Theru lived there for a while.
Oh.
Kapai?
Yeah.
Kia ora.
That
was awesome.